Okay, so my career has led me to be a bit of an environmental and sustainability generalist. So I thought today, given this opportunity, I'd put the conference and the subject of the conference in a bit of a global context. So less specific than the first presentation, but see how this grabs you. So, at the interface of man and the environment, what do we really know? So, what do we know? This is a tagline of the conference, and it's been mentioned already. The built environment has a greater impact on natural resources than any other industry. So we think we know that, and you can think of many examples. What else do we know? There's a scarcity of facts from the future. Now that might be a different engineering problem, but still, the past can't tell us everything about the future, and your financial advisor will tell you that. And there's the concept of the black swan that we don't know about improbable events. And particularly, the dinosaurs probably didn't expect the asteroid. The tipping point of ecosystems is poorly understood, and that's something I'll come back to. What does no one know for sure? The concept of the self-healing planet, and I think this is something that politicians subconsciously fall back on. It'll be okay. The planet will be okay. And we don't know about these tipping points, whether the disruptions from humans could tip us over the edge. We just don't know. So what should we do? Now, we should consider the past, in my opinion, and look at the big picture. Now that's a bit of a cliche, but sometimes you do have to take a step back, and particularly for the people at this conference, we're looking at sustainable ecological engineering design. We need to say, why are we doing that? And just remember the drivers, because it's easy to get pulled into, it's a low CO2 driver. Well, it's not. It's about sustainability. So we need to pull back a little bit from that. So the three things I'm going to talk about now, the planetary effects, the big planetary effects, human tendencies and human behaviour. I mean, we heard in the first presentation about human behaviour dominating a system, and I think this is true here. I'm going to touch on subsidies as well. And then precious resources, air, land and water. So planetary effects, and these are the two big ones: climate change, CO2 and biodiversity. Three things I want to look at there is the visibility of each, of the effects of each, and then the ease of measurement, and why the these different aspects dictate how we look at sustainability, or how society and politicians look at sustainability, and then look at the concept of the self-healing planet. So climate change is very visible to the layman and everybody. Everyone can, at least at my age, you can look back to your childhood and say, yes, it's very different. It's warmer. The weather patterns are different. It's definitely changed. You can see that. Anyone can see that. You don't need any scientific training. Biodiversity is much less easily visible. People are aware that if the bees are killed, then if we lose those, then we lose a key part of an ecosystem. Even that's not as well understood, and it's just not easily visible in the same way. If you look at ease of measurement, we hear all the time in the news that climate change will increase global temperatures by 1 degree by this year, or we suspect it will be by 2 degrees, and we can redress that by various mechanisms. And then we reduce it to a single figure in terms of ppm in the atmosphere, and it's really easy to measure, and just about everyone understands that. And again, you come back to biodiversity, and you look at families and species and ecosystems. You do need a bit of an education, and people aren't willing to think that deeply. So we've got these two big planetary effects, and the difference being that one's visible and easy to measure, and politicians have clung to that, and it's skewed, in my opinion, skewed attention towards that, and it's become a surrogate for doing the right thing, but it's very one-dimensional. You look at big corporates sell themselves on CO2, energy, and it's easy for people to grab onto as a marketing message. More worrying is the self-healing timescales. I think scientific evidence, and we'll look in a minute, is that, you know, CO2, if we do address it, it will correct itself. It will take centuries, but then redressing biodiversity, you know, this happens over much longer periods of time. Most people will have seen these graphs, and these are from different sources, ice cores and atmospheric measurements. You can see over, that's 50 years, see the increase in CO2 in terms of ppm. We all know what the effects of that are. Now if we just look over a couple of thousand years, so the last graph you looked at is that little bit at the end, and we can see descending into pre-industrialisation and that steady level, so that's a couple of thousand years. So go back 20,000 years, and we can see the last ice age, see it descending there, but the pre-industrial level was a bit of an equilibrium level at the time. And then if you go into approximately 1 million years, you can see CO2 reaching equilibriums with different planetary situations, ice ages and so on. So we can see that CO2 does respond, and the scientific research says if we do address it, we will get the levels back. If you times that bottom axis by approximately 1,000 and we go into millions of years, we can see a representation of biodiversity, and we can see the extinction events over the last 500 million years, and the recovery is over tens of millions of years. This is not something that you can address. The human race can, or it's going to be very difficult to find a technological fix for this. And if you look over just the last 50 years, and this is the Living Planet Index, which focuses on vertebrate species, you can see a massive drop-off, 40% reduction in the number of vertebrate species. That's quite worrying if you think about the timescales of which you need to act to change these. So that's the first thing I wanted to look at, the planetary effects. Human tendencies and behaviour just dominate. This is what I call the 20th and 21st century sink. We all want everything. As consumers in this capitalist society, we're actually borrowing from the past and borrowing from the future. If you look at the Victorians, they built big infrastructure systems, and we let those rot through the 20th century. So we didn't address them, we just enjoyed the benefits. We're starting to invest now, but no one wants to invest. Everyone wants the benefits, no one wants to invest. We're borrowing from the future as well. Cheap energy. We don't want to properly pay for the effects. So the external costs, we're not really bothered about. No one wants to see the electricity bill go up. We like cheap energy. But that's borrowing from the future. So we borrow from past generations and future generations. I think in terms of habitat destruction and biodiversity, it's not borrowing, it's taking. You can't give this back. Well, I can't think of a way of giving it back. So there's destructions of habitats and a reduction in biodiversity that we've taken from the future effectively. Now there's a clear need to arrest this, and I think this is why we're here at this conference. Arrest the taking from the environment, regard the environment as a service, and ecosystem services is a big buzz, it has been for the last 5 or 10 years, rather than a right, as we've seen it in the past. It's a free resource. And I like the sort of phrases such as net positive, normally in relation to energy. But it's this kind of thinking that needs to really be promoted now. I think any slide like this isn't complete without a thought on environmental ethics. And your drive to work might be someone, you might use as much CO2 as someone uses in their whole year in a developing country. So air, land and water, precious resource. I don't want to go into each one in detail. We've talked about air and you know how that's deteriorating. And land, we know about habitat stripping and the use of sort of materials. A lot of my career has been on water, so I think this is an interesting resource. That's a great picture. That's from the US Geographical Survey, and that's the whole water on the planet as a sphere. And it looks quite small, but that includes oceans and everything. If you look at that in more detail, so you look at 3 spheres. So A is the one that we can see on the planet, and that is a sphere of about 860 miles diameter. That's all water. Now fresh water, which we're really interested in, is less than 1% of that. But actually, very little of that is accessible. In lakes and rivers, you know, we're talking a very small amount. Imagine a sphere, and it's that little sphere which is about over Atlanta, which is 35 miles diameter. And this is spread across the world. We've got an increasing population, and you know, we contaminate water quite freely, and it's a precious resource. So there's 3 things I've talked about: the planetary effects, human behaviour, and precious resources. So I've not brought you much good news really, so sorry about that. But I think to recap and just put the overall conference in context, the hearts and minds battle still isn't won, and that's probably a common theme I think between this presentation and Alice's presentation. We can't predict the future, but we can learn from the past. We can learn that. That's all we can do. We don't have a time machine, unfortunately. That'd be great. CO2 and climate change, I think it's getting too much prominence at the expense of things that count even more, and it's being used as a bit of an inappropriate surrogate by perhaps unscrupulous corporates and governments and people who just don't understand. You know, you look at the American presidency race, they don't even understand CO2, so there's no chance on the other stuff.
He doesn't understand, full stop.
Sorry. Don't want to insult your countrymen.
Please don't. No, please do insult Trump.
All right.
I'm pleased that you are. Yeah.
But other things that, you know, they're much less reversible. I think if there's one message to take away from this, that's it. And resources are precious, scarce, and under increasing pressure. So what should we do? Do I have a magic bullet for you? I don't.
Swash
actually.
that.
Yeah.
Don't ever say that's an American.
The least we should do, and the main message is proceed with caution. And I think that's what we are doing with sustainable ecological engineering design. We perhaps sometimes don't know why we're doing it, others don't know why we're doing it. And this is why it's the precautionary principle that we have to adopt. So thanks.
Thank you.